Welcome to the Fiscally Awesome podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gardner, CEO and co-founder of Hiline. Today we have an awesome guest, Joseph Cabrera, currently the head of the operator network at Mainshares. He's got some awesome perspective on small businesses to share. Joseph, welcome to the show, and let's get into it. All right, JC, it's good to see you, man.
Oh, man.
Thanks for joining the pod.
Good to be on, Matt. So good to see your face, man. It's always good chatting with you.
You too, man. So I think maybe just for the audience, one cool thing about this for me is you were the very first person that ever interviewed me or asked me to be a guest on a podcast. So my experience with you was my very first. So I cut my teeth on your podcast, Professionally Offensive, man. So in a lot of ways, I think you inspired this podcast, which is super cool. So let's get into it, man. So help us just set the stage, man. I'd love to just get your background. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, your current role at Mainshares, and we're going to get into the operator network, man, but just a little primer about what the operator network is, and we'll draw you to it.
Yeah, we'll go through it all. So I started off my career as a non-business person, but I'll take that back. Actually, slightly incorrect. Growing up in South Texas, my mother is the entrepreneur in the family. My father, career public servant, former military, Department of Defense, all that stuff, worked on the border for a while. And so I knew public service was something I wanted to do. But I always worked in the shops and the design studios and the restaurants with my mother. And she'd start these things, grow them from 3 to 5 years, sell it to somebody in the community, which takes a lot of guts because that person's going to be there. You can't get away from it. So they're always inspired by she could create something out of nothing and then add value to the community. So I knew at some point I wanted to go do that. And so, but I decided to go serve my country first. So I spent the better part of a decade in the military, and really I thought I'd do 20 or 30 years. And just because I loved everything about it, man. I got to do some really great stuff, everything from Alaska to Afghanistan, and really just got to enjoy jumping out of airplanes and climbing mountains and leading teams. Really enjoyed every bit of that, kind of that physical leadership and being able to just be around some really great Americans. But I got this feeling of getting into business and this calling of kind of getting back to what I remember helping my mother with when I was younger. And so at about the decade past, I had decided to leave the service and do what almost every kind of military guy does when he's trying to figure out how to get into business, which is how do I convert my currency? So I went to business school here in Texas. And that's where I started to really just understand the business of language, kind of some of the more interesting parts of what it took to run these businesses and the language of it, so to speak. So got out and very fortunately was able to get into the finance and tech space. And I had a gentleman that ran this company here in Austin that I owe a lot to as far as really cutting my teeth in it. And I came on as his chief of staff and really just learned a ton about what it took to not only run a company, but also just the intricacies of finance and tech. And this is and still is, but this was really in the heyday of fintech and just really being able to. So I went from jumping out of airplanes and kicking down doors to being in Silicon Valley and hedge funds in New York and just going, I'm learning way more here than I ever learned in my MBA, just going and doing the motions of that.
Two different types of badass right there.
Too kind, man. I really just enjoyed every bit of it. So I was hooked. And I recognized at that point, I learned a few things. And one of them being that that there was a lot more to business than just the ones and zeros on a spreadsheet. There's almost 98% of the things we dealt with on a day-to-day were people stuff. It almost had nothing to do with the other things. So my background took me into a couple different businesses after that, just kind of meeting some of those folks and running different things and really just starting to build my own little reputation in that world that, hey, this is a guy who can take over a business, grow it, and be able to operationalize it, put some leadership rigor around it, and then really get strategy into motion. And so I went from there to go run a performance brand, some development and construction after that, and just these different companies that I was moved to and utilize a lot of what I learned from the last one. Where I ended my time before joining Mainshares and the operator network here was I actually founded my own company called Wild Whisper. In addition to that, was doing this kind of where you and I met, running a leadership and development podcast called Professionally Offensive. And those two things really work together. And so what I recognized as I was running and growing these teams and companies, the one thing that we lacked, or one thing that I knew that we were lacking, was that real shared camaraderie and what I called shared suffering. It just wasn't there. And these teams that were really elite and sophisticated and talented still had a hard time getting things done. So created this company that took leaders just like you, Matt, and got them into some really uncomfortable situations, pushed past their comfort zone. Everything from taking them on expeditions in Alaska to teaching them how to race rally cars and using that construct to make better high stakes decisions and those kinds of things. Ran that for years, and it's continuing to inform just all the things that I love doing, right? Combine my military experience along with the business stuff. After years of doing that, though, is one of these interesting. I was not looking for main shares, not looking for the operator network, none of that
Mhm.
stuff. And just so happens that sometimes the right thing falls right into place at the right time. And this great team here that's based out of Austin was helping small business owners pass the torch in a really responsible and respectful way. They weren't taking the typical, let's just juice this thing up full of money and ones and zeros and let's get it going. They had a lot of dignity and got introduced to the founder, Will, here, and to the company. And what I recognized is that they were actually really mission driven, not just saying that. And so that's what prompted me to join the team and specifically head the operator network here, which all we do all day long is go find and forge the very best American owner operators that are going to take small business into the next generation. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit of who I am.
Yeah, that's super cool. So one thing you don't actually, I don't think, know this yourself, but when I first met you, my hope was that you would wanna come be my chief of staff as I was trying to figure it out.
Yeah, maybe I did not know that. I don't
You
know.
didn't know that. I don't think I ever told you that because you didn't seem interested, but that was totally, like, my motivation when we first met was maybe he'll wanna do it, help get us on the rails, but
It's
you
all.
were doing a lot of other cool things in the world, man. So,
It looks like y'all did
I
just
love main shares. So just more on main shares. So basically, like, talk like the capital formation strategy, right? So main shares is a conduit providing an opportunity for small businesses to have a path to an exit, retirement, what have you. And because that's pretty rare, right? I think that's one of the biggest challenges with small businesses is they don't really know how to wind it down.
yeah.
And I think the other part of the problem that you're solving for is they don't know who to hand it down to, which I think is where the operator network comes in, right? So you like double click into like how does the strategy work? Like how does main shares work? Where's the capital come from? What's the process look like? If I came to you as a small business owner, like what does the whole thing look and feel like?
Yeah, man. No, it's great. This is a true one-stop shop when it comes to small business America, and it is one of the coolest and the most interesting parts about the small business world. It is still the Wild West. Like, real estate and private equity and tech, like, there's a process and kind of an ethos, and there's already systems, but in the small business world, it is still very much gunslinging out there on how everything kind of works or doesn't work. And so what we recognized is that we needed to figure out a way to put this all in one place. And so the way that Main Shares works, like our entire mission is driven on how do we back the future of American business owners that are going to be these new owner operators. And how do we do that by giving them community, capital, expertise, and the tools to be effective? That's our entire mission. That's entire what we live by, what we breathe every day. And even more importantly, how do we fight to keep all these things local? Because we recognize these communities in America like really need these businesses to continue being successful because they give so much back to the communities they live in. And so the way Mainshore operates is we operate first. We were founded on a brokerage model first. So we were just helping businesses, owners sell their business to the next person. We learned a lot
Yep.
over years of doing that. With that, we recognized that capital became a big constraint. A lot of these businesses don't fit perfectly into an SBA loan because they're either too big or they're complex or something else is going on. So to answer your question about capital structure, this is where we stood up our investment platform, where we have a lot of great folks that want to invest in American businesses, and it allows that bridge and that gap of capital to be harnessed through this investment platform. And a lot of ways in which you can do that. We have a lot of folks that'll raise on their own, but we also have different ways that we can help operators who are not as familiar with how to do this on their own, or maybe not as sophisticated or well versed to be able to get the money that they need in order to make this dream come true. And then the final piece of it that kind of wraps it all together is what we call the operator network that lives under Main Shares. Well, the operator network is its community, its expertise, and its access. And so we recognize is that investors and owners almost live and die by this one question: who's running the thing, right? Who's taking it over? They want to know.
Yep.
It's not what's the investment strategy, how are you going to grow this thing or whatever. Their entire thing is Matt somebody that can go the distance? Does he got grit? Does he have the ability to think creatively and on their feet? Can he get punched in the mouth a lot and still figure out a way to be profitable at the end of the year? And so we realized that if we're really gonna make this thing work, we got to spend all our time investing in making the very best operators and helping them be the very best position, not only in the acquisition process, but also post process, which is the actual hard part of running the business.
Yeah. So I have a bunch of questions. So maybe
Fire
we'll
away.
start with because for a long time, even as an accounting professional, right? Entrepreneur, business owner, like a lot of times, a lot of the jargon around M&A, buying companies, raising capital, you don't understand it. And I can almost guarantee like 95% of the people that are going to listen to this probably don't necessarily 100% understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But is it fair to say that like part of the problem is like most small businesses are not of a scale where it's easy to get access to capital, meaning you're not 10 million, you're not a couple $1,000,000 worth of profitability. That means private equities is tough. It's a tough sell, especially if it can't grow beyond a certain point. Doesn't mean it's not a great business. You may not be bankable, or maybe the interest rates aren't favorable, or maybe you can't get financed enough to get the liquidity that you want to be able to transition to somebody else. What do you find is like the biggest challenge for a small business owner? Is it education? Is it like, do they eventually they start to get it once you go through the process? What's the experience for the average operator
Yeah, the
when they
average
come to you?
yeah, the average operator typically comes into this world. So I'll approach it from two angles here. The one who's trying to become a new owner comes into this world and really doesn't even know where to start. And a lot of their old like bag of tricks don't help them. They maybe grew up at Amazon, or they're a corporate person, or they're a veteran or former athlete, whatever it might be. And they're trying to pull from like things they've learned in the past, and they recognize it doesn't directly apply to the way that Wild West of small business works. And then from an owner's perspective, a lot of them unfortunately don't even think about what happens when they get ready to retire until it's too late. And so by the time they get
Yeah.
there, unfortunately, either P's not interested because it's not big enough, like you mentioned, or they've not set their business up ready for sale, meaning they haven't put systems and process, even basic stuff in place to allow them to hand the keys over to the next owner in a way that's going to be good for them and good for the new owner. And so what ends up happening is time runs against them, and they end up getting to this kind of proverbial finish line. And they're like, well, it's got to be worth something. It was worth something when I was there. And they also don't realize, I think, yes, what's the biggest kind of obstacle, if you will? For them, it's not realizing that a lot of the times it was literally them, the single human, that was holding everything together. And now
Yep.
without them being there and putting the right systems and processes in place, it becomes quite tough. So this is where here at Main Shares and the Operator Network, not only helping new owners help get into that world, because there's a lot of opportunity now, right? These are great businesses that just need a little TLC to really get it to where it's going to continue to ring for
Yeah.
generations to come.
I think you've probably felt it. I've felt it. You know when when you're in a business, if it's like a little bit feels like a house of cards, like if you get hit by a bus, the whole thing would come crumbling down.
Yeah.
And then I think to your point, if you've been running your business for 20, 30 years and you wait 30 years to try to put systems in place, like it's super tough to do it at that point because you've been doing things a certain way for a long time. And it's also, you got to have the juice and I think probably the stamina to go through like this rebuilding process to put them all in place. There's a lot of transformation work, change management that needs to go into building structure and process into making it sustainable beyond you as a single human. That's cool, man. So the operator network. So what do you think? So we talked about the business and like where the business has like where that needs to be a little stronger. What about like the individual, like the operator? Like when you find the person that you think is best suited to run it, like where do you find they need the most coaching and development to be able to get to that next level?
For a lot of them, probably 2 or 3 things that I think are most important. So, and it depends on who the operator is. So I'll go by personality type. You've got some folks that are a typical operator we see that is interested in buying a small business, right? A plumbing, a marketing company, an HVAC company, a construction firm, whatever it might be. They're these really sharp MBAs. They've worked and crushed it in Goldman or JP, and they've Amazon. They were in the leadership development staff. And so they're used to a lot of robust infrastructure. They're used to a lot of just what I would consider a baseline of knowledge on their team. Folks know how to just use certain technology in a certain way. There's certain lingo, all that stuff. Then they
Yep.
get into buying a small business and they don't realize how much knife fighting it is. Like it is, you're running in a lot of ways blue collar workforce. You're probably the only person who's ever seen a P&L in that company. And more importantly, you're probably the only person that has any understanding of like how the plumbing of the entire company works, pun intended if you're a plumbing company and analogy if you're not, but it's one of those things where we actually have to help them do a lot of humbling and deprogramming in a way that allows them to really respect that, hey, this is a successful business, but you got to understand that they're still using paper invoices, that the way you lead a blue collar workforce, for example, is very different than what you were used to talking to analysts and associates at JP Morgan Chase or whatever it might be, right? So that's just a very different kind of way of leading. The other person that we get is like what I would consider a very strong people leader, like a veteran or a former athlete or somebody who's just maybe they were a founder before and they're coming into the fold here and they need help with understanding how does one buy this business? How does one actually operate it so that I'm not going out of business with working capital? It's a little bit more of the sophisticated stuff that they may not have as much backing on. And then the last person that we see quite a bit of and that we want to continue to see more of I would actually say we want to see way more of is our trades folks. These are folks who have been trades folks for 15, 20 years. Now they're the general man. They started off as a baseline electrician and now they're the general manager of an electrical shop somewhere. And they never even knew that this was a possibility in their career to go be an owner. And so a lot of them also believe that there has to be a lot of wealth that they have to bring to the table in order for them to do that. And what we find is that if we can educate them on that and let them know that this is a possibility and get them to believe us, then it ends up opening their eyes up. So we end up doing educating and training and coaching in a lot of different ways. And the last thing I'll say about all of that is we recognize that sometimes coming straight from the operator network is not the most helpful, which is why we've stood up this entire advisor network that literally complements this entire thing. These are guys and gals who are seasoned veterans in the owner operating space. They've been 3 to 5 years to 30 to 40 years doing this. So sometimes the best person to hear it from is someone you're actually trying to be like. And so what we do is in addition, match these folks up with just some really great mentors that'll help them from everything from strategy to, hey, look, these are the human skills and how you talk to your workforce if you want to establish respect. So that's
Yep.
the things that we educate folks on, and it's full spectrum.
That's super. So we should talk about the paper invoice thing. We don't want no paper invoices. We can help remedy that problem.
Yeah.
So to bring the whole thing together, right? So if I say I own a services company, marketing, I use marketing agency, for
Yeah.
example. And if I come to you and I say, hey, I'm ready to retire. Let's say I'm doing $5 million in revenue and I'm clearing $1 million. Like you said that sometimes the operators or the prospective operators don't necessarily they're like, I don't have the capital to do it. So can you just talk about like, how does it become possible? Like, how does it get financed? What are some of the options that they have to make the whole thing work?
Yeah. In our model, there's a lot of ways to do it for sure. But
Yep.
the way that we prescribe here at Mainshares is that you use a combination of a few things. And actually, I think one of our last posts we put out shows a really cool capital stack on how we see a lot of these deals come together. But typically it's investors that'll take a portion of the company and a minority portion of the company. It'll be some little bit of seller financing as a lot of the times is what we see. And then you have usually an SBA or a bigger form of a loan that kind of takes care of the rest of it, which is really the operator's equity there that is earned over time. And so that's typically how we structure it. And it varies deal by deal. And the question you did not ask, but I'll answer just because I'm sure it's a follow up, which is like, why take it with investors versus not? And I think in some ways there's a lot of thoughts behind why you would take investors versus not. We find really uniquely valuable here at Mainshares and the way we do this is that investors, unlike a bank, will they win and lose with you. And we want to keep these operators and owners in the majority seat. But the nice part about it is that, especially if you find the right investors, a lot of them are also want to go the extra mile to see you be successful. And so this is where having these folks on your team or on your advisory board, so to speak, it can be super helpful when you're running the business. The other thing that's nice is that we find that a lot of these investors are aligned with your goals. So if Matt one day wants to be 100% owner, a lot of them are like, great, I actually don't want my money locked up more than 6 or 7 years. And at that point in time, you can figure out how to buy me out. We can establish what that looks like. So with all that said, that's typically how our capital stack works when we're buying these or helping these new owners buy these businesses. And that's
Yep.
what we've seen work well in the past.
So in a in a traditional investment scenario, it'd be a C corp, right? They'd be a shareholder in a C corp. Is it the same structure, or could it be an investor that actually owns part of the pass through it, like an S corp, where they're like sharing in profits on a regular basis,
Yeah,
or is it both?
yeah, these investors, they do own, like, they do get dividends and things paid out to them. So that's what's nice. A lot of these investors do have, it depends on the business, but a lot of the time, so long as growth and investing back in the business isn't something that feels necessary, or maybe it's necessary, but doesn't feel like you have to use all the capital to return back. What a lot of investors really love about this investment is that they get to see their cash coming back to them quarterly or annually or whatever it might be. So it allows them to be a pretty decent engine for them to keep their hand on the pulse as they're
So it's
continuing
like
to make
it's an
investments.
annuity. Yeah, they get a nice annuity out of it.
That's right.
That is unique and interesting. So the investor network, the platform that you built. So what does it take how do you participate in that? Could I go in and just do it tomorrow if I wanted to? And what are the like restrictions, or what are the minimums that you would need to do that? And then how do you sift through all the opportunities?
Yeah, it's a really cool. I'm really proud of what we're all really proud of what our team put together over here, but it is a very user-friendly experience that you jump onto one, because normally, as you remember, if you've had anybody ever done a real estate deal or about a small business, a lot of times it's a lot of staplers and paper and legal and lawyers and everybody getting together. What's nice about this process is that you go online, Matt can sign up for an account today, opens into the platform and has access to all the active deals currently on the platform. And you can go take a look, you can get a background on who the owner operator is behind the deal, get a little bio with them. A lot of the times an intro call can be made just to get a little bit of understanding of what that looks like. But all that stuff is right there. And then when you do invest, it all makes it really easy through our rails to be able to get those funds in, capitalize that deal. And then once that deal closes, that's where all the distributions and everything are also managed through. And as we continue to build more and more upon that platform, it'll continue to become much more user friendly for folks as they think about, how's my investment doing? The old ways was, if you were lucky to get on a meeting or a call, then, you might be fortunate. But what's nice about this is you'll be able to log in, really start seeing what the health of the business looks like. The operator can give you updates through that. It just makes it really seamless for folks as they're making these kind of investments in America.
Yeah, that's cool. So what I love about main shares and what you're doing is like the accessibility for small businesses. Like I think it's such a common problem, and so many of them are hyper localized to the community they work in,
Yeah.
and you're giving them a path, right? So hopefully we can help spread the word a little bit. And I love that you're leveling up future operators, giving them an opportunity to step into the driver's seat of being an entrepreneur. So our thing is we're trying to help founders and operators think more like finance people and get stronger in that area of the business, which I think tends to be the most intimidating part of the business for most first time and sometimes multi time founders and operators. What do you think is the most challenging thing as it pertains to finance that you see people struggle with the most?
I think one, it's a mindset. So I think for a lot of folks, they look at numbers as like a necessary evil, as opposed to something that can help them tell a story and actually enable them to actually make better decisions. So way I like to describe numbers in general, especially in small business, this is less an issue like in bigger corporate America, because there's such a rigor behind it. But
Yeah.
usually numbers in small businesses is like a necessary evil. At the end of the year, we got to do taxes and all this stuff, and then you're just like pushing it off. The way I the way that we see challenges is folks getting to embrace that, first of all, from a mindset perspective. And we help them look at it as much more, hey, these are your gauges on your car, right? If you're driving this race car, you want to know where your RPM's at, you want to know your fuel, you want to know your speed, you want to know your oil temp. Like, all that stuff's super important. So if you can embrace that, it's going to allow you to just be a much more effective operator. Then the second thing is understanding, like, then what to do with those numbers. And so one thing that, for example, is an anecdote that we see here is like folks understanding how do you look at working capital? Because in a lot of ways you can grow yourself out of business if you're not careful, right? If you're a construction company and you are not paying attention to when certain revenue is actually going to actually hit your accounts, and you're continuing to sell into bigger projects that require larger deposits, you're going to come in a spot where you're actually doing great business, but you're out of business because you got no more cash in the bank to be able to go make the payroll payments and all these other things. And so we find that being able to understand how all these different things work together, it's not just the P&L, but it's also the cash flows, and it's also your balance sheet and how all that stuff talks to each other. It's something that can empower you to have a lot of fun with it if you embrace it. if you continue to see it as the boogeyman, it's one of those things from a mindset perspective. We just get a lot of folks end up treating their business that way. So I'd say just mindset and then getting them to then use these gauges effectively.
I think accountants need to take partial responsibility for that, right? Because we've been having this conversation internally a little bit because the technology is changing so much around us that you can almost, with the right operational systems, you can start to give almost daily insights to your business as how it's doing. It's possible now. But for some reason, we think about business cycles in 12 1 month increments, which
Yeah.
is like, why do we do it that way? So I think we're forcing business owners to consume like performance data about their business, which is really what it is, in a format that they don't understand, but that's what accountants understand and think should be most universally accepted. So that's one thing that we're trying to solve for here is how do we give the information to operators in a way that's more digestible? Because P&Ls and balance sheets, I think it's super tough for folks to know how to read it.
Yeah. Even the folks that are competent in it, like it's tough. And I think you're right. You just prompted something in my brain. It was an old piece of knowledge that I remember learning early on in business, which was like, hey, don't cater the business to the systems, right? And we like a lot of the times businesses operate based on how an accountant wants to digest the information. And that's not
Mhm.
great business. So if you can find accountants that can be real partners and think like a business person would think and vice versa, then it ends up creating a really great synergy.
Yeah, you should. I'll get you the link for it, man. We're gonna do a webinar where we talk about this, and there's a new partner, a platform called Digits we're gonna use to allow us to be able to do this for our clients and future clients that you might find interesting just to watch it.
I
And then
think
maybe it's something that could be a good resource for some of the folks in your operator network.
very cool.
Because yeah, man, it's interesting. It's like the one like how many industries out there. If I asked you, like, Joseph, how often do you want to get insights about your business and how do you want to consume it? You likely would tell me every day and in a way that is like businessy, not accountant-y. And accountants, they're like, no, we're going to do it this way once a month. And it's going to be in a format that I prefer. So I just find that dynamic really interesting. And I think there's a ton we can do to make it easier for business owners to understand and get it. You got to meet people in the middle.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. Because there's value on both sides of the equation. I think it's just finding and I think a lot of it's exposure to why. I think a lot of the times if you start to I remember one time early on in my business career, I remember going and living down with the finance team for an extended period of time because I was like, man, there just seems like a lot of pain points at the end of the month. Like they're all frustrated and I don't know why. They're just doing numbers. What's going on down there? And then you go down there, and you're like, gosh, man, this is hell.
Like
This
war
does suck
zone.
for them. There's a lot of stuff going on. We could probably be more helpful. And then vice versa. It's experiencing each other's pain has a really cool way of allowing you to then come to a solution that's, like, good for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. Yes. I agree 100%. So when you're trying to coach some of the founders in your network, like what are some of the you talked about like some of the things they need to get better at. Is there any like where how do you let's take a playbook for helping them develop the muscle for finance and accounting? Like how do you get them there?
Yeah, we go through an entire process, like, in a methodology for us, and it's going through we got modules and lessons and a path that you go through, and it's everything from acquisitions 101, S&B finance 101. We go through these different skill sets to build on each other, operations leadership 101, then we got the 201s and the 301s, and then we also have experts that come in, like the Matts of the world and stuff, and we'll talk about various different things in a much more applicable and practical way. And so what we're excited about is we were really doing all this kind of white glove, right, for a while when we first kicked this thing off. It was very much consulting. Like we'd get an operator that needs help, we'd rally around them, and then we'd teach them this. With the amount of folks that are coming through the pipe and the amount of folks we need to help take care of, this is what we're really excited. Mid-Jan, we're going to be launching our entire online community and platform. That'll be the
Oh, that's
operator
cool.
network, and you can think of it as not only just an engaging, interactive chat room and cool topics, and I'll have different forums and stuff that you can intertwine and tinker with and get more info on specific automotive stuff or how do you raise capital or all those things. But you'll also have education modules that are self-paced that you can go through. And then in addition to all that stuff, we got another program called Forge. This is more of our in-person, highly interactive, highly intensive that basically takes all that content and you're still part of the community, you still have access to all that stuff, but
Yep.
shrinks it down into a really engaging way. So that's how we educate and train all these folks. And it's all very action-based curriculum.
That's cool. what's the scale of Bain shares? Like how many deals and operators do you put through the system on an annual basis ish, if you can share that?
Yeah, we've had over the last few years, we've vetted, I don't know, thousands of deals we've executed as far as like seeing them. So we get a lot of pattern recognition. As far as like deals that we have helped owners execute and sell to helping operators gone through it, there are probably 100 plus of those that have come through
Yeah,
us, and that volume and is still continuing to increase. And then right now, heck, even before the platform is even going live, like we are helping operators in our system right now. But right now, we have folks just like waiting up, like they've opted in, they filled out an entire application because that's what it is. It's an application base. So we're making sure we're getting high quality, great folks coming on the platform. And right now, we're at a rate where there's hundreds of folks a month just asking to be on the
that's cool.
application wait list so they can get access to it to eventually go be an owner and learn what it
Yeah,
takes. So
cool.
we're starting to feel the momentum, and my hope and my daydream is that we end up having thousands of people a week looking at this as
Yeah.
well, but for right now, it's a pretty healthy number.
Do you think is the operator network can you be in the network without being like on the platform looking for capital, or are they got to be together?
Yeah, today you can't because we are still in that consulting mode where we're helping folks and
Yeah.
we're looking through that. Come mid-Jan, in order to have access to the operator network and the entire ecosystem that is main shares, you have to be applied, interviewed, and a member of the community in order to get that kind of access. And what we're also doing is we recognize we really want to just talk to folks who are dead serious about doing this. Now, you
Yeah.
could be dead serious about exploring and we still want to talk to you. You could be dead serious about the deal process. So there's people who are at different stages. We just want folks who are like strongly considering this stuff and really want to take this craft of becoming a future owner and operator serious.
Yeah, that's cool, man. So I gotta imagine, right? Like the boomer generation is like getting ready to start to retire, and they're running so many of these small businesses, man. Do you guys have a thesis or hypothesis around what that wave looks like in terms of like market opportunity for
Absolutely.
you guys?
Yeah, there's right now the current figure is over the next decade there'll be $11 trillion in small businesses changing hands or going poof. And so it'll either change hands, go poof, or be bought by private equity. And
Yeah,
so where main share sits is we want to keep these businesses locally owned. And so we are the kind of the answer to these owners who would rather have had a son or daughter who wants to own this business,
yeah,
and they became a doctor or lawyer, were uninterested. And so what we're trying to do is go find these folks that basically are their sons and daughters who are highly capable and will treat their business with respect and take it on for another 30 or 40 years. But that
yeah,
opportunity is huge, man.
yeah.
A
Well,
once
I'd
in a
even argue,
lifetime type thing.
yeah, I'd even argue, even if you do have a son or daughter who you think would be a good candidate to take it over, like you should still put them through the program and work through the network because it's going to increase their probability of success and finding happiness in what they're doing. So I think it's great work you guys are doing, man. So
I appreciate
hats off to you all. And I got to like you vetted hundreds of deals, right? Thousands of deals. You've done 100 plus deals. Like in terms of small businesses, right? I think it's like one of the hardest things to gauge is how is like the small business economy doing? There's not like a great way to measure it. You can say unemployment, et cetera, but I don't think there's like a great way to know. So what do you like right now in terms of for challenges for SMBs? Like what are you hearing when you're talking to folks? What are some of the biggest challenges that you think they're facing right now? Current state.
a couple things. One, I think that I think small business is healthy right now, and a lot of it is micro, like how's this specific
Yeah.
industry doing? So the nice thing is it is a little bit of dealer's choice. Like you as an operator can also find a business that's thriving and not have to necessarily put yourself in an industry that doesn't work. The other thing that we're hearing, so generally speaking, the economy is strong in small business, and especially if you can find one that's being operated well, because you're really focused on this core community, and that's where the nuances are and being able to unlock. The challenges that face small business is one that I think has faced them for a long time, but probably even more so in the current generation and culture, which is getting a workforce that can meet the demand of services needed from those small businesses. So specifically, a lot of these owners are saying no or don't have time or don't have the human capital to answer these plumbing service calls, for example. And if they had more folks who were actually interested in becoming plumbers, then and training up the trades to get there, then they'll be able to service those clients. So we actually have one of our advisors, for example, that owns 4 or 5 locations here in Central Texas. They do plumbing, HVAC, electrical. And he decided that, you know what, I'm tired of trying to weight on the trade schools and stuff to incentivize, right? So he just built his own school. Built his own school. He's taking guys and gals straight from high school, teaching them, giving them
Love
a
it.
job right away. It's the best. This guy's like it's just like a total example of what we want folks to be. So I think as long as and I know a lot of the older generation will say, these new folks don't know how to work. I think they do. You just got to go figure out how to find them. And I also think that you got to figure out how to incentivize them. The nice part about trades, for example, is that I think the economy is already changing their kind of tone. And really, the fastest way in a lot of cases to a six-figure job is probably becoming a plumber or an electrician or something and not going to college.
Couldn't agree more, man. I think white collar jobs with technology evolving, a lot of what that was, I think, is changing in front of our eyes. And I think it's harder to make the work of what a plumber does easier. And there's not enough people that want to do it. So I agree with you. I think there's tremendous career opportunities for people out there to get into the trades.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's dead on, man. So I think, and I could go all day on this, but I think there's a lot of things to be very optimistic about. I think that here's what I will say. Small business, probably unlike a lot of other things in this country, I think the spirit of America is like directly tied to small business. If you think about where a lot of small business started back in the 30s and 40s, and even the 50s, and every generation's got like a new wave of small businesses that get started. It's all from folks that have just were like, think about the mindset of somebody who starts their own, I don't know, moving company. A lot of them are probably realize a lot of them possess a certain kind of grit and tenacity that I think is embodied in the American spirit. Some of them are started by immigrants who just chase this dream of getting to America, and now they've grown this thing. So in a lot of ways, I think that as long as optimism and the American spirit stays strong, I think these small businesses will always figure out a way to continue moving through. And I think if you see a business has been around 30, 40 years, they've already been through a couple cycles. And so my gut check is they've figured something out. And our job
Yep.
as main shares and your job as an operator or future owner is to figure out what that unlock is and how to embrace that personality of the company.
Yeah. There's nothing better than running a small business. It's a lot of work. It's gritty. It's hard, but man, the freedom and the fulfillment that comes from building and running something and seeing it work, man, like you can't replace it.
Yeah.
Any, like, in terms of any other opportunities out there, like anything you're seeing, like, I just wish everybody would go out and grab this opportunity. And you can speak to trades, whatever. Like, what opportunities are you seeing out there for folks?
I think what I am seeing is there are a lot of owners right now that a couple things. If you're a tradesperson, there's a lot of opportunities to buy a business that requires usually a master certification that you have a unique ability to buy. Whereas
Mhm.
like a general operator or a general owner, like if you want to go buy a marketing company or a construction firm, maybe construction, depending on the type, generally speaking, a lot of folks can probably have access to that. But if you're somebody right now who's a plumber, electrician, HVAC, has a specialized skill that requires a master license in a certain state, there's a unique opportunity for you to go, maybe I need to go buy a business. And so I think those are the things that right now we're actually trying to educate that group more and more about how they go do that, what the path looks like and how we can help them. But I think the opportunity is there because otherwise what ends up happening is that this business, the owner usually will they'll hang out for a little while so you can operate with their license. And then at some point it either goes poof or it ends up finding its way into a roll up somewhere or whatever the case might be. So I think there's an opportunity there for folks to even get a good deal on a business because an owner knows, hey, it's going into somebody who's actually licensed. The other thing that I'd say is there's opportunities all over the place. Just spending a little time understanding what your unique skill set is and how you can add value to it is something that a lot of owners just instinctually know. They just see a guy like Matt pull up, and a lot of them are okay if you don't have any experience in this particular industry. But if you can leverage something that you're awesome at, whether it's sales or being just really good with customers or understanding how to operate a team, you'll find that a lot of these owners will hang out with these new owners for a couple months, 6 months, a year, and they'll be
Yep.
there as this built-in mentor to help you get up to speed so that you can get after it. So I think it's a broad answer, but I do think there's an opportunity around
I
every
love it.
corner, just how you do it.
They'll love it. Anybody that's like winding it down, man, they want nothing more than to see the next person succeed and mentor and share the war stories, the good and bad. So
That's
I
right.
think that's 100% right.
Yeah.
All right, man. Let's do a little rapid fire. A couple questions before we wrap it up. So, best piece of advice you ever got in your career,
Best piece of advice.
and you can tailor it to business if you want.
Yeah. Probably go back to my time working with my mother, watching her grow businesses. She used to say she had a lot of great pieces of wisdom. But one of them One of them I didn't know was for business. And now I go, oh yeah, it was totally for business. It's totally for everything. She used to say, before a man can save the world, he must save himself. And I'd go, I don't know. At the time, I was like, "What are you talking about, Mom?" Usually, when I had a lot on my plate and stuff, and the whole later on, it started resonating with me, where I started to realize you got to really get your stuff in order. You got to take care of yourself. You got to figure out who you are as a person. You got to get your house cleaned up. You got to start understanding what you stand for. Then you can go out there and start doing the big stuff. If you want to go start doing the big stuff and you have no rudder, good luck. And so I think
Yeah.
those are the things that I look back on. So a lot of the times when I notice, like in business, things are getting chaotic. Oftentimes that's driven by the leader being anxious or not knowing what the heck's going on. When a leader knows what they're doing, you could be in the middle of a firefight and still bring calm to your team because you know where you're going. But when you don't know where the heck you're going and what the heck you're about, then yeah, it doesn't mess up. So that's carried with me for a long time. So that I'd say that'd been it's probably one of my most core pieces of business and life advice.
All right. One financial myth you wish some of the small businesses out there that would be good candidates, maybe for main shares, the operator network, that you would dispel, that you wish folks thought about differently?
Revenue is the most important, is a myth. And I would say that revenue is absolutely important, but you have to also look at what's ultimately coming down to the bottom line. And so I think that there's a lot of great businesses out there. And unfortunately, when you're new to the game, you can go, oh man, this thing is cranking out $3.6 million a year. They are looking all the way down, and to include like understanding, and this kind of goes back to a conversation we had earlier, like understanding how all those numbers actually manifest itself to the end. Because unfortunately, you can make a financial statement look a little bit the way you want to, depending on how you're categorizing things and those kinds of stuff. So I would say the revenue is important, but the myth that I would tell folks is that it's not the only important thing when you're looking at something.
Profitable growth. You got to learn how to grow and make money doing it
That's right.
for your business to have true value. All right. Well, give us a resource, man. What's your favorite podcast that you listen to? It's your own podcast.
That's not my own podcast. It's the favorite podcast I listen to, financially related or non.
Doesn't have to be.
Let's see here. I'm as far as podcast goes, a fan of you probably have nobody on the show that listens to this. It's called the Meat Eater podcast. And this is a complete hunting outdoors type podcast. And the reason I mentioned that is you were asking what's my favorite. It's conversations that are very philosophical around a thing that most people would consider, sporty or whatever you want to call that. And so what's neat about that is it always reminds me that everything we do in life can have deeper thought to it, and don't always judge a book by its cover. So you got these guys that are hunters and they're all talking, but it's the most philosophical conversations you'll ever hear folks talk about conservation and principles and morality and like all those things that come along with it. So I really enjoy that show. Usually a favorite of mine. And then I think it's not a show, but it is it was actually given another operator a book recommendation the other day. And I tell folks, like, if you can read Sun Tzu's Art of War, I think you'll find some killer nuggets in there, man. It's just some stuff that like, it seems so simple and easy, but when you like dive into it, right? It's like, they just got so many great nuggets in there. Victorious warriors win first, then go to war, or the greatest victory is one that requires no battle. It's like things that you're just like, what the heck is that even saying? Like it jogs the memory. But I've always found that to be important. I mean, part of it's my old career that kind of led into that, but I find it to be helpful in business as well. Like you start like diving into the simple principles of life, and you do realize like it just takes incredibly good discipline, strong discipline to make the right decisions. And oftentimes it's not the thing that it's trendy or popular or whatever it might be.
The best decisions are usually the hardest ones.
That's right. Yeah.
So
That's right, man.
right on. You heard it here. If you're a small business owner, if you're trying to figure out what comes next for you, hit up JC and Main Shares, the Operator Network, learn a bit more about that. JC, I love having you on, man. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your time. Probably want to check in with you sometime down the road, see how things are progressing with Main Shares.
Please.
But in the meantime, man, have a good holiday season ahead, and we'll follow you from afar.
Yeah, man. Good chatting with you too, man. Always good to catch up.
All right, man. Be good. Cheers.
Yeah.